Hello, and welcome to the History of the United States. My name is Matthew, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Episode 1 of History of the United States. I'm Matthew Stanley, and thank you for joining me. Today we're going to talk about the European discovery of the New World. And no, we're not talking about Columbus. So, before I start, I do want to make it perfectly clear that I speak English. I don't speak French, I don't speak Italian, I don't speak Norwegian, I don't speak Icelandic, or any of the other many words that I will be pronouncing throughout this series. Today, we're looking at a lot of Icelandic, Norwegian, and a little bit of French. So bear with me if you speak those languages and I totally butcher something. Please let me know in the comments and provide me a link to how to pronounce it would be fantastic. But I love to learn, and I only speak English. Sorry. So a lot of the material that we are going to cover today is from what is called the Sagas of the Icelanders. It's a genre of Icelandic literature called sagas that are basically they're prose narratives, and they are based on historical events, and they focus on families and genealogy. The events in these sagas took place between 800 AD and 1100 AD, also known as the Saga Age in Iceland. Sagas were originally orally passed down, and they weren't written until the 13th or 14th centuries. So there was a gap between when the events happened, when they were told orally, and when they were eventually written down. In total, there are more than 45 sagas that make up the Sagas of the Icelanders, including some that are thought to have been lost forever, unfortunately. We're going to be focusing on two of those 45 plus sagas as our sources for what we're discussing today. And again, they're thought to be historically accurate to a degree. So we're using today the Saga of Eric the Red and the Saga of the Greenlanders. The Saga of Eric the Red, actually there are two versions of it. One was written in the 14th century and one was written in the 15th century that clearly used the same source that many think to have been originally written down in the 13th century but was lost. But between the two of those versions, 14th and 15th century versions, they do vary in many of the details. The Saga of Eric the Red covers much of the same information as the Saga of the Greenlanders, but with some pretty big differences. For example, Saga of Eric the Red says that Leif Erikson was blown off course and accidentally discovered North America west of Greenland. This contains a lot of information on, the Saga of Eric the Red also contains a lot of information on the Old Norse religion, which makes sense since the title character, Eric, stuck with the old pagan ways of the Norse religion. The Saga of the Greenlanders was originally written in the 13th century, but the oldest manuscripts we have are from the 14th century. This saga says that a man named Bjarni Herjolfsson sighted land to the west when he was blown off course sailing to Greenland. Leif Erikson later explored that land. This is the more detailed version. The Saga of the Greenlanders is more detailed than the Saga of Eric the Red, and therefore it's the more commonly cited of the two sources when we're talking about facts. In the end, all we know for 100% certain, though, is what has been shown through archaeology, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But these sagas have enough of what we know. These sagas have enough that we know that the story of what happened is true, even if we don't have actual facts. We know that these are based on fact. We know that they have similar stories between them, so we can pretty much interpret that to mean that these events, even if not the details, happened. So there was a gentleman named Asvald who lived in Norway, and he had a son, Thorvald Asvaldsson. His son was Eric the Red Thorvaldsson, and his son was Leif Erikson. These last names are not surnames the way we think of them here in America. These surnames are actually what are called patronymics. As you can see, if you're looking at the screen, Thorvald Asvald's son. Eric Thorvald's son. Leif Eric's son. So you take your father's name, add son to the end. They do the same thing with the daughters. If Asvald had a daughter named Greta, she would be Greta Asvald's daughter. It's the same thing. Anyway, so Asvald was Norwegian. His son, Thorvald, is where we're going to pick up our story. He and his 10-year-old son, Eric, left Norway in 960 AD due to what the saga of Eric the Red calls killings, or what the saga of the Greenlanders calls to escape murder charges. There are some interpretations of the text that also say that he was banished from Norway for murder. So one way or the other, Thorvald was involved in the killing of somebody and was either banished or fled to Iceland. He settled his family in the northwestern part of Iceland, where he then lived out the rest of his life. Eric the Red Thorvaldsson. The red was most likely due to his hair color. A lot of Norwegians are blonde, but there is plenty of red hair in the Norwegian bloodlines as well. He is credited with discovering Greenland when he was an adult, obviously. Not the 10-year-old boy that came from Norway. He was credited with discovering Greenland, and therefore, frankly, Greenland's part of North America. He discovered the New World. He established the first settlement in Greenland in 986 AD. So, what else was going on in the world in 986? If you're with me on the video, you can see a map here of Europe in 986 AD. It's the early Middle Ages. We're just coming out of the Dark Ages, and we're just starting the Middle Ages. Athelred the Unready is King of England. Who's Athelred the Unready? Well, his great-great-grandfather was Alfred the Great, who kicked out a bunch of Eric's relatives, by the way, out of England during the height of the Viking Age. Alfred the Great, like I just said, was the one who unified England and brought it together and is really considered to be the first king of England. This is his great-great-grandson, Athelred, at this point, is king when Eric discovers the New World. Lothar was king of the Franks. Yeah, that's right, the Franks, not France. There's no France yet. There's also no Spain. Spain won't exist for another 500 years. And even Castile, which was Spain's predecessor, won't appear on the European map for another almost 100 years. Another country that's famous for its explorers is Portugal. There's no Portugal on this map. They're not going to come around for another 150 years. If you look on the east, if you can see the map here, Poland, Hungary, and Croatia, they're all brand new countries on the European continent. And if you look down in the far bottom right corner, that's the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Emperor is Basil II. Okay? So this is not the Europe that we grew up knowing about in the time of Columbus. That's definitely not today's Europe. Quite a bit changed between the time Eric the Red discovered the New World and 500 years later when Columbus did it. Eric the Red maintained his belief in Norse paganism. He was worshipped Thor, Odin, all those names that you guys are familiar with from, Marvel movies. Eric the Red actually believed in those guys, and he worshipped them. However, his son Leif became a Christian and converted his mother. In fact, Eric's wife is said to have commissioned the very first church in Greenland, and therefore the first church in the New World. The first Christian church. Eric was not a calm guy. He was pretty hot-tempered as well as being very adventurous. Just probably as I imagine his father was, since, killings and all. Eric was a fighter. He killed various neighbors in various disputes, and that's how he got himself banished from Iceland when he went out and discovered Greenland. So his father was banished from Norway. He was banished from Iceland, although he was allowed to come back to Iceland at a later point. Moving on to his son, Leif. Leif Erikson, it's unknown where he was born or grew up. He might have been born in Greenland. He probably was born in Iceland. He did have a sister, and he also had 3 brothers. One of them became an explorer as well and was killed in the New World. We're not going to talk about him today, but just so you know, he did have a brother that did some of the same stuff he did. Leif's just more famous for it. So as we look at resolving the 2 sagas, it's feasible that after Bjarni, remember him? After Bjarni sighted land to the west, that possibly Leif was also blown off course as he was headed to Greenland and saw the land. So yes, Bjarni saw it first, and yes, Leif was blown off course. But instead of sailing back to Greenland the way Bjarni did, he went on and decided, let's go explore this thing. And when he first landed, he saw self-sown wheat fields and grapevines, is what he said or what the sagas say. Self-sown wheat fields and grapevines. He then returned to Greenland, bought a bigger boat for himself, hired men, he got himself a crew together, and he decided he was going to go explore this new land that had so much wheat and grapes. His father Eric was supposed to join him, but he fell off of his horse on the way to the docks and took this as a bad omen and refused to join the expedition. Otherwise, it might have been known as Eric the Red's discovery rather than Leif Erikson's, as we give him credit today. So Leif explored this area of the Labrador Sea that we'll see here in a second. He explored this area roughly around 1000 AD. We don't have an exact date because the sagas aren't big on historical data like that. They're more about the family. The first place that Leif landed was he named Helgeland, which means the flat rock land. Possibly Baffin Island, which is, if you're looking at the map, is the big island to the north up by Baffin Bay, possibly to the south of where the arrow is pointing, which is Labrador. We don't know. It's roughly right there somewhere, though. The second place he landed, as he moved on, because that was not suitable for growing grain or anything like that, he moved a little bit south to a place he named Markland, or what means forest land, possibly near Cape Porcupine in Labrador. And the tip of the arrow, if you're watching the video, is pointing right at Cape Porcupine right there. It next says that he explored a small island to the north, which you can't see it on this map at all that I've got. There's a small island just north of where the arrow is, and it's called Belle Isle, and they think that that's possibly where the small island to the north is. He went past a cape on the north side, which is possibly Cape Bald, and ended up landing at a place he called Vinland, which means wine land, and established a small settlement there that he called Leifsbuder, which means Leif's Booths. And he decided that they were going to spend the winter there. They built a fairly large settlement, and we'll talk about that settlement a little bit later, if that is indeed where it was. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. And then he returned to Greenland in the spring with a ship full of timber and grapes. And that was the explorations of Leif Erikson. So who was Leif? Well, Leif was converted to Christianity by the Norwegian king Olaf Tryggvason. Again, I don't pronounce things well. His reign was only a short one, from 995 to 1000 AD. So we know that Leif was in Norway and converted by the king somewhere in that time to the Catholic faith. And after discovering Vinland, Leif then decided he was going to bring Christianity to Greenland, and he had a lot of converts, including his mother, as we saw, and his mother ended up setting up that church. So Leif really gets credited with also being the first missionary, Christian missionary in the New World as well. The next person we're going to talk about is Thorfinn Karlsefni. Karlsefni. Again, pronunciation not my expertise. He's a very major player in the sagas. Thorfinn and his wife Gudrid followed Leif Erikson's path sometime around 1010 AD, so about 10 years after Leif explored. Thorfinn and his wife set out to explore as well. Leif agreed to lend him the use of the buildings at Leifsbudir, but did not sell them to him outright. Thorfinn took between 60 and 140 men and a few women, depending on which of the sources you're reading. So 60 to 140, somewhere in there. So that's a sizable little colony to start off with. And set out with his 3 ships, and he established a settlement of an unknown location. Whether he stayed at Leifsbudir or not, we're not sure. We don't know. But he might have set up a camp at an unknown location, which may have been this next one that we'll talk about here in just a second. He had a child that they named Snorri, who became the first known person of European descent to be born in the New World. Snorri Thorfinnsson. So, now onto this place that I've been talking about. Lance Almedo, hopefully I pronounced that right, is an archaeological site of a Norse settlement dating to the early 1000s. It was discovered in the 1960s, and evidence suggests that it could have supported between 30 to even up to 160 people. Well, how many people did Thorfinn take with him? 60 to 140. How many did Leif take with him? About 30. So we're not sure. This could have been Leifsbudir, or it could be the unnamed settlement of Thorfinn. We just don't know what Lance Almedo, which one of those it is. What we do know, a little bit of, there were, I think, 7 to 9 buildings built there, big buildings, and you can see the shape of them still if you're looking at the picture here. If you're looking at the picture, you can see that they're big. There's some people in the picture as well. They're big buildings, so, and many of them were divided into smaller rooms as well. We also know that that's not as far south as the Norse went. They found butternuts at this archaeological site, buried right along with everything else, so it's not like some tourist dropped them or something. They found butternuts, which don't grow north of New Brunswick. So that shows that the Norse must have explored much further to the south of Nova Scotia, maybe down as far as, some people I've heard suggest as far as Virginia even. But definitely they must have explored the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. There is some archaeological evidence that they went all the way into the Great Lakes and as far as Lake Superior. So yeah, they could have explored quite a bit after what the sagas tell us. But in the end, it doesn't matter whether Lance Almedo was discovered or settled by Leifsbudir or if it's Thorfinn's settlement, or even a subsequent settlement after that, what it does is it concretely proves that the Norse were the first Europeans on the mainland of the New World. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me, and please join me again next time for The Lure of the Far East. And remember, the Constitution only guarantees the American people the right to pursue happiness. You have to catch it yourself. Thanks.